Look at a map of China. One country, one territory, one government. That's what the map shows you. But maps are political documents. They tell you who controls the land. They don't tell you what the land is worth or who the land is for. Split China's map by economic output instead of political borders, and what you get isn't one country. You get three: the coast, the engine, the Yangtze River Delta and the Pearl River Delta, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen. 22% of China's land produces nearly half its GDP. The Northeast, the Rust, the old Manchurian industrial heartland built by Soviet planners in the 1950s and slowly hollowed out since. And the interior, the other China, a territory larger than India, home to 400 million people, producing less economic output than the coast produces in a single province. One flag, 3 economic centuries. And here's exactly why the Yangtze River Delta is not a country. It is not even a political unit. It is 4 Chinese provinces, and it's one of the richest economies on Earth. This territory, including Shanghai, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Anhui, and it produces approximately $4.7 trillion in annual economic output. That is the same as Germany. So the 5th largest economy on Earth is not a country. It is a cluster of Chinese provinces along one river delta, and Guangdong province, anchored by Shenzhen and the Pearl River Delta, adds another $2 trillion, larger than South Korea, the largest subnational economy in all of Asia. Together, this coastal strip, running from Guangzhou in the south to Shanghai in the center, represents the largest concentration of export manufacturing wealth in human history. The ports of Shanghai and Ningbo Zhoushan are the world's 2 largest by cargo tonnage. The electronics, textiles, pharmaceuticals, and machinery that move through them reach every country on Earth. 900 miles northwest of Shanghai in Gansu province, the per capita GDP is $6,638. The gap between them, nearly 4 to 1, exists within the same national border, under the same government, using the same currency. China is not divided into rich and poor the way most countries are, on a spectrum with movement between ends. China is divided into economic zones operating on fundamentally different rules, different infrastructure, different integration with the global economy. The coastal China that the world does business with, and the Western China that most of the world has never thought about, are not 2 ends of the same line. They are 2 different economic systems wearing the same flag. Before 1979, Shenzhen was a fishing village of 30,000 people. Today, it is a city of 17 million with a GDP larger than Hong Kong. The mechanism was the Special Economic Zone. The first 4, Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, Xiamen, were designated on August 26, 1979. All on the coast, all chosen for proximity to Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. Access to overseas Chinese capital that the mainland could use without ideological compromise. The rules inside an SEZ were different from the rest of China. Foreign companies could own assets, repatriate profits, hire and fire without the usual state enterprise constraints. Tax rates were lower, bureaucracy was lighter. The zones were, in effect, capitalism inside a communist state, contained geographically, politically deniable, and immensely productive. The results were staggering. China's special economic zones now account for approximately 22% of national GDP, 45% of all foreign direct investment, and 60% of total exports. They employ more than 30 million people, and most of those people were not born on the coast. They moved there. Deng's formula created the miracle, but it also created the problem. Every yuan of coastal wealth was built partly on a decision to concentrate resources in 4 cities and leave 900 million people in the interior to wait their turn. The waiting is now 45 years old, and the people waiting are moving. In 2024, China had 299.73 million internal migrant workers, a number larger than the entire population of the United States. And this is actually shocking. They are called non-Mingong, rural migrant workers. They leave Sichuan, Henan, and Hunan every year by train, bus, and on foot to work in the factories, construction sites, and delivery networks of the coastal cities. Of those 300 million, 178 million cross provincial lines, leaving not just their villages but their entire regional economy. They build the coastal economy. They do not live in it. The hukou system, China's household registration system, ties social rights to the province of birth. A factory worker from Sichuan who has lived in Shenzhen for 15 years cannot legally access Shenzhen's public schools for her children, cannot access the city's subsidized housing, and cannot access local health care at the same rate as a registered resident. She is, in legal terms, a guest in the city she helped build. The migrants make the coastal machine run. The coastal machine does not run for the migrants. Their remittances flow home to villages in Gansu and Guizhou. The wealth does not. The 300 million is not just a labor statistic. It is the measurement of a structural imbalance, the distance, literal and economic, between the China that the global economy knows and the China that grows its food, staffs its factories, and has never seen a skyline that looks like Shenzhen. According to the World Bank, 214 million people in China still live below the $8.30 per day poverty line, and almost all of them live in the West. The interior is not monolithic. There are three distinct Western realities. The central inland provinces, Henan, Sichuan, and Hunan, have partially industrialized, have their own mid-tier cities, and have benefited from some infrastructure investment. They are poor relative to the coast, but not desperate. But then there is the deep west, Gansu, Shanghai, Tibet, Yunnan, where terrain, distance, and decades of neglect compound each other. Then there is Xinjiang, which has its own political category entirely. The income data tells the story precisely. China's top income quintile earns 98,809 renminbi per year. China's bottom quintile earns 9,542. A 10-to-1 gap inside a country that officially practices socialism. The urban-rural income ratio was 2.34 to 1 in 2024, narrowing slowly from its peak of 3.3 in 2009, but the absolute gap in renminbi is still growing, and the structural forces are not relenting. China's property downturn, the collapse of Evergrande, and the broader developer crisis have hit interior provinces harder than the coast. Interior provincial governments depend disproportionately on land sales for revenue. When land prices collapse, rural schools go unfunded, hospital construction stops, infrastructure maintenance falls behind. The coast weathers the downturn. The interior absorbs it. The official Gini coefficient for China is 0.465, placing it among the most unequal large economies in the world, comparable to the United States. Independent estimates have gone higher. What the number doesn't capture is the geography, that inequality in China is not random. It has a direction. It points inland. It points west. It has pointed that way for 45 years. Xi Jinping announced common prosperity in 2021 as the solution to everything described in the last 4 blocks. It has not solved them. The tension at the center of Chinese politics right now is between the machine that created the wealth and the promise to redistribute it. Deng's formulation, some can get rich before others, implied that the before had a natural end. Xi's formulation, common prosperity, is the declaration that the before has now lasted long enough. The mechanisms announced under common prosperity include regulatory crackdowns on the private tech sector, restrictions on the private tutoring industry, pressure on billionaires to donate to social causes, and expanded social spending in rural areas. The problem is structural. The coastal economy is the economy. Guangdong's output alone exceeds the GDP of every province west of it combined. Redistributing from coast to interior without breaking the coastal machine is the central unsolved equation in Chinese economic policy. And it is unsolved not for lack of trying, but because the two goals are in genuine tension. Firms locate on the coast because of the agglomeration effects, the ports, the suppliers, the talent concentration, and the logistics networks. You cannot move those effects inland by decree. A 2024 study found that Chinese citizens increasingly attribute inequality to systemic unfairness rather than individual effort, a shift in public perception that makes common prosperity politically necessary regardless of its economic effectiveness. Common prosperity is not a policy. This is a problem that 45 years of deliberate policy created, and that no one, including the people who created it, has figured out how to solve without risking the machine that funds everything else. 1% of China's population holds 1/3 of its national wealth. The 1% are almost entirely coastal. The bet Deng made in 1979 was not irrational. It worked. China lifted 800 million people out of poverty in 4 decades, the largest poverty reduction in human history. The coastal machine generated the surpluses that funded infrastructure across the interior, however unevenly. The special economic zones proved that Chinese labor and capital, given access to global markets, could build world-class industries at a speed no economist had predicted. But the bet created a dependency. The interior depends on coastal surpluses for fiscal transfers, for infrastructure investment, for the remittances sent home by 300 million migrants. The coast depends on the interior for labor, an endless supply of workers willing to leave home for factory wages because the alternative at home is worse. The two economies are locked together in a relationship neither can afford to exit. And at the edges of the system, the strains are visible. The property downturn has exposed how thin the fiscal cushion is in interior provinces. The demographic shift, fewer young workers available to migrate as birth rates fall, is beginning to tighten the labor supply that the coastal factories depend on. The two economies that grew apart for 45 years are now being pulled toward each other by forces neither designed. China is not facing the question of whether to become one economy. It is facing the question of how. And the answer, whether through redistribution, through interior urbanization, through technology-driven development that doesn't require geography, is not yet written. What is written is that the three-economy structure Deng built on August 26, 1979, has lasted longer than almost anyone expected, and that the people still waiting for their turn, 214 million of them below $8 a day, in the provinces that were always supposed to come next, are still waiting. China is the world's second-largest economy. It is also, simultaneously, home to more people in poverty than most countries have people. Both of those facts are true. They are true because of the same decision made in 4 coastal cities in 1979 that concentrated development where it would grow fastest and left the rest to follow. The three economies of China are not converging quickly. The coast is not waiting, the interior is not catching up fast enough, and the political project of common prosperity, of closing a gap that took 4 decades to open, is running against a structural logic that political will alone cannot override. The question China will spend the next 20 years answering is not whether it can grow. It already knows how to do that. The question is whether growth can be made to travel, from the delta to the plateau, from the factory floor to the village, from the economy the world sees to the economy most Chinese people actually live in.